Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, there's so much to talk about in terms of reporting, environmental, societal and governance reporting is at the moment, I would say, pretty erratic and a little bit difficult to get a grapple on. And this is where you come in, trying to unite it, but also make something that's binding rules. What's your main challenge in trying to achieve this goal?
That's a really good question. Thanks for having me first, because today is an important day for us. And I'd say the main challenge is that everybody recognizes that capital markets today do not count everything that counts. And one way or the other, there is an understanding that sustainability issues may be material to investors' decisions on how they allocate capital. And today there is like an alphabet soup of many, many standards and reporting standards, etc. So what the IFRS Foundation has learned from a consultation to its stakeholders is that it could play a role in trying to bring everyone with a unit set of global baseline and building blocks on the themes of environment and social and governance topics in the near future. So that's really what we're doing. And the challenge is, of course, that you need to be as precise as possible for the standard to work. And yet, these are topics that, by definition, they are not about financials and accounting. So they are more difficult to grab and grasp. And this is where I think that delicate balance needs to happen.
So how do you bring that rigor? Again, I know you're going to consultations. How difficult is it to have a set of rules for financials that also takes account how companies are not doing bad for the environment and the society?
Yes, I think first of all, we build from the IASB work, which has the IFRS accounting system, which are adopted by 140 different jurisdictions around the world. And so we really build from that. And then our scope is really about any information about sustainability that is material to investors' decision on capital allocation. And so the rigor is in ensuring, first of all, that we start from the frameworks that have been the most established and solid over the last several years. So we're building from, as an answer to the request from G20 leaders who started with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Information, the TCFD disclosures. So we implement that framework in terms of governance, strategy, risks, targets, and metrics for companies. So that brings solid rigor. We also start from climate. And on climate, we start with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is a widely recognized protocol to measure the emissions from entities that we report on our standards.
So you start with climate change. Yes. What's next after that, and how do you choose?
Yeah, well, next is going to be a matter of agenda consultation, because the Foundation and the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, which I represent, will work on the basis of what the market needs are. And the consultation said climate first, but not climate only. So in the second half of this year, after the current consultation on the general requirement and on climate, we'll come back to the market and tell and ask them what next. And actually, already this consultation will, I think, inform us on that as well.
I mean, this is really to have a coherent sustainability reporting standards. And of course, what you come up with will heavily impact the IASB. But the U.S. jurisdiction is not involved in that. So, does the ISSB impact U.S. investors more?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because that's part of the challenges and the opportunities as well. I think the fundamental approach to the IASB work so far has really been through a jurisdictional approach. So basically, countries would look at our standards, and in principle, they would be adopting those standards. They look at the next standard, and they use it in their jurisdiction. They make it mandatory. But I think today there is also another opportunity, in particular when it comes to climate, but even beyond that, which is direct market adoption, market participants. So investors, companies that have already embarked, for instance, in the US, there is this fantastic ISSB standards that are industry specific and that we expect to consolidate in a few months with them. The ISSB standards are used by thousands of companies. So we expect that on top of jurisdictional adoption of our metrics and standards, there could be direct market adoption. And this is probably where there will be a combination with what the SEC has put out for consultation in their ruling, in particular in climate, on which we could be complementary, bringing additional requirements, which in total would fully meet investors' needs when it comes to climate in this particular case.
Do you think the US will adopt your standards? And are there ongoing conversations? I know we're just at the beginning, and it's a very ambitious project.
I don't think the US will adopt from a legal standpoint. I don't think the SEC is going to say, let's take and embark everything. But we are working in order to make sure with jurisdictions, including the US, in order to make sure that our standards are going to be supplemental, complementary, compatible with their rulings. And this is where, there is this dual approach of jurisdictional dialogue and engagement and market dialogue and engagement for us.
So the dual approach is also the ISSB responsible for financial accounting, and then the ISSB, which you're in charge of, responsible for ESG. So how will the two boards interact?
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you. And because I think that's one of the strengths of our proposal, which is to really build from the accounting. So we start there. And that means that, our standards are not going to be in a limbo somewhere. In many ways, the first requirement, the general requirement that we're putting up for consultation today is the equivalent of the AIS 1. So it's the foundational work. And a lot of the AIS structure has been put into this so that the connectivity is there. And this is just an illustration of how connected the work of the two boards are going to be, because I'm starting to have questions from preparers and investors as to, well, if you go as far as measuring the material impact on the company's enterprise value of sustainability, maybe at some point it's got to be translated into the financial statements. And that's a very fair question. And I think over time...
Will it?
I think over time that's really a discussion that needs to take place, yes, because obviously if you start having an even clearer structure of reporting on risks and opportunities, for instance, you would expect that the risk committees of boards and the audit committees of corporate boards would like to see that, and if they see that, maybe gradually there will be a clearer topic for providing for that into the account themselves. That's not our remit, but that's clearly where the two boards are going to be very connected to make sure that the reporting is without any disconnect, but any overlap either that is not intended, to make sure that the cost of reporting in total and the readability for investors is going to be optimal.
But do you worry that if the focus is too narrow on financials, you'll miss the bigger picture of just looking at companies that do bad for the environment?
No, I don't worry, because I don't have to worry, because the remit of the IFRS Foundation is really, it's a general public foundation working for the interest of capital markets. And I personally believe that, if a couple of years' time from now, our standards are moving the prices and moving the capital allocation because of the impact that sustainability topics have on companies, we would, do our part in making sure that the climate transition, that is an obvious thing that needs to happen, is done in sync with finance, and finance has got the right tools, the appropriate tools to make their own decisions about it. And that's where we are. Now, it's all good for other people to look at what you're saying, which is the impact on the outside world, which, as long as, if that impact is material in a risk, for instance, on reputation or license to operate or regulation or transition risks, because this impact exists, there will be other stakeholders, and that impact becomes material financially for the performance or the prospects of the company, it will be captured in our standards.
So reputation, for example, would be doing business in Russia at the moment?
I guess that's a topic for the moment, yes, yeah.
So how do you view, if you're a financial operator right now, how do you view your scope in longer term? Does it touch really everything that does good for the world? Like, is there an end point to it?
I don't know if there is one, but the one very, very important aspect is in our work is that we are not doing policy. We are not even deciding what is good or what is bad. We are providing the disclosures that allow people to clearly see transparently what the issues are and decide whether they want to do this or not, and what is the cost, the benefit, etc. So we really have to, and we will completely stick to this neutral approach, which but that needs to go through the granularity. I'll just use an example. If in Europe, you've seen the taxonomy that was a few months ago about nuclear being green or blue or whatever it is, etc. And natural gas, is that going to be, and how long for, and which condition is it going to be, green, blue, or whatever. That's the current state of what the policy in Europe is. Maybe
but that's a judgment, isn't it? A judgment at every time.
And that's exactly where I'm coming, which is that our metrics would provide transparency through the taxonomy. Right. So we would require companies to disclose their energy mix in Europe. And then it's everybody's decision whether they like nuclear or they don't like nuclear. It's not for us to decide. Right. So it's very important that we disconnect our work from that policy work. It needs to be, I should say, it needs to be connected, because we are not operating in a vacuum, but very distinct. And I would like to maybe remind one fundamental thing, which I think is one of the strengths of the IFRS Foundation, is the ISSB is fully independent on its decision-making to adopt a metric or a standard. Fully independent. Not even the trustees can look at what we do when it comes to the standard-setting activities themselves.
But for example, I mean, look, the war in Ukraine is an interesting topic. I know it's a difficult one, but do you have to take a judgment? So even if you're neutral, if you measure it, then it means that you pass some kind of value to it.
Well, I think if there was any metric to be had, is how do you handle conflict-related areas and doing business in those areas? And if in 3 years down the road, through the agenda consultation of the IFRS, the investors and corporates were saying, this is an important topic, then we would have to take it and say, okay, if this is material, you need to disclose something about it. Okay, so let's work about what you need to disclose about it. So it's really this consultation process that makes sure that we are only working and resourcing our work on topics that the market believes is material.
So how fast can this be up and running in terms of a timeline? When are you expecting? What are the big timelines that you're looking at? And you also have to hire quite a lot of people.
Yes. So today is a big milestone, big day, because the exposure drafts are ready for the general requirement, which will be the IFRS S1, Sustainability 1 requirement when it's finalized, and the S2, which is about climate. So we are opening a 120 days period for consultation, and I really encourage the participants of this conference, if they are stakeholders and if they have an opinion, to participate in our consultation. And actually, not only our consultation, but there are other jurisdictions out for consultation right now. Europe will be in a few weeks' time, probably. The US is already. So it's very important to give clarity and coordinated approach, because we will learn a lot. There is a momentum in this that is important to use to make sure that we are as relevant as possible. After that 120 period, which is back end of July, the board, the ISSB, will be quorate and will be working on the feedback. And depending on feedback, we continue to believe that end of this year is probably the right period where we think we can land the general requirement and the climate ready for adoption.
Emmanuel, talk to me about the ESG data field. Why is it so messy? Is there a danger that it's to the company's advantage if it's very difficult to measure? And that's why in 2022, for the moment, it's still a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, it is all over the place. We are trying to do our part, if I may. We have clarified a few very important things. One of the broadest used standard is SASB. It started from the US, but they have a global reach as well. And we are progressing towards the consolidation of the SASB standards and the international, Integrated Reporting Council, part of the Value Reporting Foundation, both of them. That was announced in the COP26. We also announced a cooperation agreement with GRI, which is interesting because it clarifies the difference between ISSB and GRI. GRI is looking at the impact side, the pillar of impact metrics. We are looking at financial standards. The two, we announced the coordination, the cooperation to reduce the noise of supposedly competing, etc.
But for companies, is it to their advantage? Do they want transparency? Or is it easier for them to hide?
No, I think, again, I think, I'll put it this way. I don't know a CEO of a large corporate, and I know quite a few, that today are not worried about not being able to take sustainability issues as part of their strategy because they are lacking the tools to discuss that with their board and to discuss that with their investors. And they know it's coming. You know, a whole set of industries are facing that wall, that cliff, whatever you want. You know, and whether that's agriculture, because carbon should be in the soil instead of being emitted through regenerative agriculture. You need to change that. You need to invest for that. And for that, you need to have the metrics that allow you to discuss with your investors. So, you know, there will always be, you know, people more or less paying attention to that. But the idea that greenwashing needs to stop is there, and it's big as a consensus.
Even from shareholders? Because you have, I mean, you have personal experience where you were doing good, you were trying to do good.
Yeah, but shareholders were fully supportive of that. The issue was a board issue, which again I think addresses why the TCFD recommendations are so important, because they start with governance. You know, the hard questions will be asked. Is your board spending enough time on climate? Is your board equipped with the expertise that it needs to do that? And is your board taking management accountable for what they do on climate? These are the questions. And so that's where I think that I can say that many, many investors realize that it is there. And I would add one very important thing, which is that beyond the retail, the institutional investors, the other providers of capital that are banks, for instance, they have the pressure from the central banks. You know, many central banks now have climate as part of their mandate for financial stability. And the FSB, the Financial Stability Board, has also a committee that deals with climate. And they need to be seeing through the portfolios where the decarbonation of the portfolio happen. So whether you like it or not, whether that's from bottom or from up, many sectors are under pressure to be able to report, you know, in an appropriate manner about those sustainability issues.
Emmanuel, we have a lot of chief executives watching. Given your personal experience, what would you say to a chief executive who wants to do good but is concerned about going too far and losing either the board or the shareholder base?
Very simple, unfortunately. Adopt our standards, because those standards are based on a consultation where 700 market participants took place, which means thousands of participants to say, we need a climate standard first, and we need it fast. So we are in this momentum. I can say, and I can testify, talking to many of CEOs now, many investors as well, that they are expecting that metric to allow them to have this dialogue. And that dialogue will allow CEOs to rethink their investors with the need to manage enterprise value in the short, mid, and long term, and actually in the broader ecosystem of their value chain, investing for their farmers or in their mines operations, or talking to their customers about reducing their footprint, etc., in a manner that will be consistent. So I really believe that starting this discussion about our standards is going to be creating many opportunities for CEOs.
Emmanuel Faber, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.